Charlie Hunnam fights for the throne in King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. An unlucky kid endures a family road trip in Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Long Haul, and the Xenomorphs return to terrorize a new batch of humans in Alien Covenant. That's all in this edition of Movies with Mark. Hi, I'm Mark McPherson, movie critic for Moviespoon.com. We're going to be taking a look at 3 movies that are currently in theaters right now, as well as movies that are on streaming services that you can watch at home right now. Our first film is Alien Covenant, the sequel to Ridley Scott's Prometheus, which detailed the origins of the xenomorph aliens from Ridley Scott's Alien. And if you were looking forward to seeing some xenomorphs which were not really present in Prometheus, well, the good news is you'll get plenty of xenomorph action in this new movie. The film follows a group of colonists on the starship Covenant that are on their way to a new planet, but on their way there, they experience a disruption which causes their sleeping pods to malfunction and one of them to die in their sleep in a horrible blaze of flames. Now, fortunately for them, there's another option on the table in which they don't have to get back into their sleep chambers and they can proceed to this nearby planet where a signal is coming from, which they can't quite make out. It kind of sounds like John Denver, but they're not too sure. And actually being serious, there's a John Denver song coming from there. One of the crew members is an android played by Michael Fassbender, whose name is Walter. Now, you might remember in Prometheus, Michael Fassbender played an android by the name of David. Well, where's David now? Well, it turns out that David is down on the planet that they're investigating. And David's been living in a cave this whole time, and he's got a cloak on himself, and he's been doing all sorts of mad scientist experiments, and he's trying to figure out his purpose in life and basically become a little bit of a crazy guy. Another key crew member we follow is Daniels, played by Katherine Waterston, and she's a bit of a crybaby at first, but mostly because her husband died when they awoke and had that big disruption where the sleep pods started exploding. So she's got enough of a reason to cry, but also enough of a reason to rise up as a, the brute warrior that Sigourney Weaver was in the Aliens movies by getting her revenge on these aliens that are slaughtering her friends. So she has a bit of a cool arc. Now, while Waterston does play a pretty cool character, and I like her arc, I gotta admit, Michael Fassbender steals the show here because he's playing 2 roles of Walter and David, and they are very different characters as these 2 androids who connect, and mostly because you can tell them apart just by their voice and their mannerisms and how they react and how they speak and how they converse and their beliefs and their ideas on life. But just in case you can't tell them apart from that, they also have different scars and clothing that they're wearing, so you can kind of tell them apart. Fassbender is playing 2 roles, and there's a lot of scenes where Walter and David are in the same room and they both have these deep conversations about trying to figure out the xenomorphs and what went down with the previous crew, and it's just great to essentially watch Michael Fassbender play off himself in this movie, because he's that great of an actor. Alien Covenant has a lot of the same philosophy from Prometheus, where we're not quite sure what's going on with the origins of the aliens, where we get these sort of these ambiguous little bits of history about what went down and what was going on with this alien race that was that had these ships and had this black plague set upon them. We get a little bit more into that, but the most important thing, I think, for most people is that if you are looking for the xenomorphs of the Alien series, you will get them here. You get lots of xenomorphs. You get baby xenomorphs that come out of people's backs and come out of people's throats, and then they start attacking each other with their tails whipping around. You get to see more fleshy xenomorphs that can stand on their hind legs like they're human and then have their mouths disappear and have their mouths pop back out again. And of course, if you love the classic black xenomorph with the teeth and the mouth that comes out of the mouth and the tail whipping around and the claws that are slicing at human beings and decapitating people, well, you're going to get it here. You're actually going to get a lot of great gore in this movie. I was surprised by how much I love these horror scenes where the aliens are just ripping people to shreds. Especially, it's really cool. And of course, I should also mention you do get the face huggers here too, and you will get to see a face hugger latch onto someone's face, implant their eggs inside their belly, and see the alien come out of the stomach. And it's pretty cool. And I mean, for a film that, and I say this as almost kind of it's pleasing to nostalgia, but at the same time, I don't think Ridley Scott is banking on nostalgia. I think he is taking these familiar elements that we know and love, but he's actually doing something kind of new and interesting with them. Like I mentioned, that scene where the alien comes out of, like where the alien came out of John Hurt's stomach in the original, that scene is present here, but when it happens, there's a much different reaction from Michael Fassbender's character of David as he watches this. I don't want to give too much of it away because if I talk too much about the plot, it'll ruin a little bit of the surprises, which I have to say this, I love how Ridley Scott sets up this film. He sets it up with a great atmosphere and tone. Like when we're in space and we see the Covenant spaceship, it feels like a space epic. When we're in the corridors and we're having the aliens chase these human beings and slice them and dice them up, it feels like a horror movie, like a really, truly intense horror film. But I gotta mention this, and this was a big complaint for a lot of people with Prometheus, is that Ridley Scott is not that great at anticipation or trying to fool the audience. Like there's a couple of moments where for like slasher movie logic, the characters will have to make stupid mistakes. And there is one scene where one character makes a really stupid mistake that gets 3 people killed, and it's kind of slapstickish to watch it happen, but there are very few of these moments. Most of the time that these humans get slaughtered by the aliens, it's mostly by accident and just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I gotta mention that the anticipation, like there's a big twist towards the end of the film. But for most people who pay attention to horror films and can pay attention to visual cues, it's kind of telegraphed what the big twist is gonna be in the end, which kind of stinks because Ridley Scott is not that great at having this sort of this horror movie anticipation where we're not quite sure what's coming up. We mostly know what's going to happen in this story, and we can kind of see the route that it's going to take. But at the same time, I love the atmosphere. I love the horror elements of this. I love the sci-fi elements of this. It's got some neat like philosophy and some mystery towards the origins of the aliens. And at the same time, it has a lot of great alien action where they're running down corridors and shooting machine guns and the aliens are slicing up people. So it's a great mixture of both interesting science fiction and just great slasher horror movie logic. It was a lot of fun. So Alien Covenant, for me, 3.5 stars. Our next film is Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Long Haul. And man, if you're a parent who gets roped into seeing this, you will be in this for the long haul because this movie is only 90 minutes long, but with the atypical family road trip hijinks that happen in this movie, it feels more like 3 hours. Or at least it did for me. Greg Heffley is the unfortunate wimpy kid in this movie, who begins the film by having a diaper on his hands, which everyone begins to film, and all of a sudden he's an internet meme called Diaper Hands. Now, how can he improve his life so people don't recognize him as Diaper Hands? Well, he figures he can go to a video game expo and film himself with a popular Let's Player on YouTube so that he can clear his name. And just so happens that this video game expo that he's going to be at happens to be on the trip to his grandma's house on this road trip that they're taking. So of course, he changes the GPS coordinates and lies to his family, and then he feels guilty along the way, and they learn to bond as a family, and yada yada yada. You know the rest of the film from there. This film was so frustrating to watch. It felt like watching a sitcom at times, mostly because they telegraph all the jokes long ahead of when they happen. So there's really no surprise here. I mean, no surprise at all. For instance, there's a scene where Dad says like he's going to be on the phone with his office while in the car. So it's like, I need peace and quiet in the car. And of course we know no peace and quiet will happen. There's another scene where Greg has to go to the bathroom, but the next stop is 37 miles. And he says, well, I really got to go. I drank too much lemonade from this bottle. And of course, do we really have to telegraph what happens? He pees in the bottle and the bottle overflows. They did that bit in Dumb and Dumber. But I guess, if you've never seen Dumb and Dumber and you've never seen films like Psycho, which they reference at one point, and you've never seen any family road trip film where they do the typical jokes of poop and puke and crazy weirdos on the road and like inhuman people who follow them and then just these ridiculous stunts that happen. If you've never seen all that, I could see why you'd like it, because when I went to the screening of this film, there were a lot of people, a lot of families in the audience who loved this. They were laughing this up so much. And I have to wonder, have they seen these other films, or are they new to this, or are they really actually laughing at the fact that a teenager puked into someone else's mouth? Believe me, I really tried to like this film. I tried to find something to latch onto here, but I just can't. The actors are terrible in this. The humor in this is awful. The whole idea of like trying to perceive screen time and how social media works and how YouTube works and how memes work and how funny like stuff on the internet is, and trying to stage all these typical antics is just painful to watch. There's a scene where Greg has to hide in a shower and endure a fat man sitting right next to him who's pooping, and we get to hear logs dropping into the toilet, and it's like, why is this a family film? Why is this funny? This is the grossest, most lame brain, my brain broke. Now first, I didn't mind the film. I didn't mind the fact that it was going to go on a family road trip, as long as it could find some character and something to latch onto here. But the problem is, I didn't like any of these characters, and I didn't like the actors playing them. And even worse, all the characters present here, it's clear, you know, until we get to the obligatory moment when they have to bond together as a family, they clearly don't want to be here. They don't want to be around each other. They would rather do something else. I would rather do something else. I would not want to watch this movie again. I would just brush it off, you know, as just, you know, an atypical family film, you know, that it tries to bond together towards the end. But there's so much that this film tries to set up and then doesn't answer. Like the teenager who's on the road trip, he wants to find money for his van. He never finds it. The parents just give him money later on. And Dad is working while they're on the trip because he's worried that he might lose his job. This never comes up again after like 2 times that it's mentioned. It's just sort of forgotten about so that we can enjoy the sights of, you know, like the car breaking down, and then them trying to get the car out of the mud, and then the mud splashes into their face, and then they're trying to kickstart the car by having it go down a hill, but then, you know, everything comes loose, and oh no, the luggage comes loose from the car, and hilarity ensues. The Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Long Haul, I tried. I tried to find something to like in this movie. I just couldn't. The acting's terrible, the story is awful, the humor's all telegraphed, none of it is clever, none of it is creative. I never laughed once. So, I'm gonna have to give it 1 star. Our next film is Guy Ritchie's King Arthur, Legend of the Sword, and it's clear right from the get-go that this is not going to be a very historically King Arthur. I mean, it involves mages that shoot fire and incinerate people. It involves giant elephants that could topple over castles, and it features a king wielding a magic sword as he decapitates wizards, and it's all shot very quickly and very big and grand and epic and so huge and so fastly edited as only Guy Ritchie can do. And then as the movie goes along, it slows down and kind of runs out of ideas and kind of doesn't really feel like a Guy Ritchie film towards the end. It just sort of becomes a bland action sword and sorcery epic. Which is really sad, because Guy Ritchie, he has a very distinct style. And there are moments here where you can feel that sort of style he had from like Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch come through here, when Arthur is planning out his plan of attack as sort of like he's planning out a heist, and we get the quick cutting between what might happen and what's actually happening and what they will be saying, and it goes back and forth, and they have slick and fun dialogue, and it's really kind of cool. But then we get to the shots of the slow motion shots in combat where they're swinging swords, and CGI takes over, and there's giant CGI animals. The story takes place in Londinium, but I swear it must take place next to like Monster Island or something, because we get to see giant snakes and giant birds and giant elephants all over the place, terrorizing hordes of armies, just laying waste to them. The film does work best when Guy Ritchie is trying to skip past some of the typical moments that we expect here. Like when we get to see the origin of how Arthur grew up in a brothel and then learned to fight at a martial arts dojo. Yes, he fights at a dojo, I did say that correctly. And how he learns to fight and learns to defend his prostitute mother from her abusive clients. Ritchie stages it as kind of a very fast montage. Very fast and loud montage that goes on for about like 2 minutes and gets most of this out of the way. And he uses this again in a scene where Arthur has to go to an island and fight all these mythical creatures for his training, and we glaze over this within 3 minutes, which is great because we don't spend as much time with like the CGI animals which he has to slaughter. I imagine a typical film this would probably take up about like 10 or 20 minutes of the script. But in this film, it feels like it only takes about 2 minutes. The only problem is that we skip over these scenes so that we can get to these scenes where we have the slow motion fighting and the computer graphics that take over, which is really a shame because, I mean, Charlie Hunnam plays Arthur here. And I think he works great as sort of as a warrior. You know, he's got the rippling muscles. He's got kind of like a very blank face, a very stoic face, I should say. And he works well as Arthur in the combat scenes. And he's supposed to have these very witty and very funny lines of dialogue, but they don't feel as witty coming out of his mouth. Like, I get the feeling that he's better suited to be more like a stoic leader who kind of takes after the rest of the members of his group. The supporting cast here is great. It's got Damon Hassoun and a few other great actors that are helping Arthur along, but they don't really get a chance to shine. Most of the time, they're either taking the lead from Arthur, or they're talking about Arthur, or they're defending Arthur, or they're stepping in front of Arthur, or they're defending Arthur. It's all about Arthur, and we don't really get to know much about these characters, which is a real shame, because I really do like these actors, and they're trying to do their best with the material they're given here. Another actor who feels a little underused here is Jude Law as the villain of an evil mage who's taken up the kingdom. He's taken from Arthur, and Arthur has to slay him in order to take back the throne. Now, Jude Law, he does make an amazing villain. He's very sinister looking. He has this great attitude towards him that's very evil. And yeah, he does get some moments where he gets to slit some throats and then cut off some people's ears and track Arthur down through the streets and basically just cause chaos wherever he goes. The problem is we don't get to see Jude Law in any action scenes with Charlie Hunnam. Like when they actually do meet and trade swords and fight each other, Jude Law sort of steps out of the picture and transforms into this giant CGI warrior wielding a flaming scythe or whatever, and he's battling Arthur with CGI. So we really don't get to see Jude Law show his claws through there. Although there were some neat scenes like Jude Law, he does conspire with this sort of weird octopus-looking monster to gain more power by basically slaughtering his loved ones to gain more of this magical power, which is kind of neat, kind of cool. There is some cool stuff here, but the problem is this film is very inconsistent in tone, very inconsistent. There are moments where the film is loud and blaring, like the soundtrack's just going to shake the theater. But then there are scenes where the film will slow down, it'll lament on flashbacks. Like, we see so many flashbacks of when Arthur's parents die. Like, we see every single angle, what happens at the beginning, what happens at the ending, where Arthur is, where Arthur's mom is in the scene, where Arthur's dad is in the scene, where Jude Law is in the scene. It's like, is this like supposed to be like JFK? Are we supposed to be seeing like a grassy knoll up on the hill somewhere or something? But we just keep coming back to it, and that's the one thing I hate about this film, is that it's a little over 2 hours, and it feels like Guy Ritchie is putting a lot of effort into the very short scenes, and then for the long scenes he's just sort of relying on like the typical slow motion and computer graphics to carry the story. I really like Guy Ritchie as a director, but I think he's just a little bit off the mark here in trying to make his very amped up, crazy, slick version of King Arthur feel really cool and really resonate as a very fun action film. I think it's just about there, but it's missing that element of character and of originality that I know he has in him, and it's just not here. So I can really only give King Arthur, Legend of the Sword 2 stars. And now here's a few recommendations for films that are playing on streaming services that you can watch at home right now. Currently playing on Netflix is Beyond the Gates, which can only be described as a cross between an 80s horror movie and Jumanji. It involves two brothers who, after their dad has gone missing for about 7 months, decide to investigate his old video store and find that he has a tape from one of those old like board games that required a VHS tape. You know, where you put the tape in the VCR and then you'd watch what happened on screen and then you'd play the board game along with it. Well, they find one game called Beyond the Gates, and when they play it, they notice that the tape mentions their father, and that if they can complete the game, they can find their father's soul. It sounds pretty crazy, and it is that crazy. I like the very classic 80s tone that this film has. I mean, it's got, you know, like the synth soundtrack, and it has a sort of like purple lighting when they go into like the weird world of the dead. And it's got actually some really cool gore in it. Like, there are moments when they play this board game which involves them essentially have to kill other people so that they can retrieve their father's soul. And when they kill people, it's very brutal, very gory, some really cool gore effects here. And it just has this very odd, almost indescribable tone of an 80s, of like, you know, like a classic 80s horror film, where the acting isn't too great, but the story is interesting enough where you're willing to go along with it. It's an independent horror film. A bit of a hidden gem, but yeah, if you have an affinity for video stores and VHS like myself, and you love those classic horror films, this is definitely a movie you gotta check out on Netflix. Currently playing on Amazon Prime is the Oscar-nominated picture Manchester by the Sea, in which Casey Affleck plays a man who comes home to Manchester to deal with the recent death of his brother, and now faces the challenge of raising his teenage nephew. This is a very great character-based movie. We really get to know a lot about Casey Affleck's character. I love how they dole out the information about his very tragic and very sad past, and then how he learns to deal with it. And I mean, I don't even want to spoil it, but what he has to deal with his ex-wife, like what he did, is just one of the most horrible things that you could never find yourself forgiving. But he tries so hard to live past that and tries to be a better person because of it, and it's not easy. It's a very sad film. In fact, I think it's probably the saddest movie of 2016. But it's so great to watch for that, just because I like these characters so much, and the writing is really good, and the non-linear editing of the story, where we get to find out more about these characters. It's just great. It's a must-watch from last year. And currently playing on Filmstruck is René Laloux's animated classic Fantastic Planet. It takes place on a planet where human beings are little more than pests to the giant blue aliens known as the Dregs. Now, the Dregs look down on them more as pets more than anything, but when they come out of the forest and start killing the Dregs, well, then they're more of a nuisance, and the Dregs have to wipe out the humans. This is a very strange and psychedelic science fiction type of film. I really dig the art style, which it's kind of a cross between traditional 2D animation and sort of the a little bit more of like the cutout animation that Monty Python used to have. It kind of goes back and forth between those two styles, and the result is are these illustrations that just look amazing. I love the design of this film. The animation is amazing, the soundtrack is bizarre, and just the story at play here is just so cool and so unlike any other science fiction film you've seen. It really is kind of a very experimental film at times, and you will find yourself probably questioning what the heck is going on, especially in a scene where the Dregs start meditating and their bodies start metamorphing into all these different types of shapes and colors, and they start having weird visions in their eyes, and it's just such a freaky film. I love the little details in this film. Like at one point, an ohm is going through this field of crystals that sort of multiply and sort of double up on people and try to eat them, I think. And the only way to stop them, to break them apart, is just to whistle. And once he figures this out, he starts going through the field of crystals and starts whistling, and the crystals explode. And then there's the weird sequence where the ohms imagine themselves traveling to a moon where they dance with beings from other universes. And it's just such a psychedelic and crazy trip of a film that it's beyond words. And now here's a recap of the movies I reviewed on this program. I gave 3.5 stars to Alien Covenant. I thought it was a great science fiction film with elements of horror in it, and gave us more of those great xenomorphs, as well as some of that great philosophy and mystery that was present in Ridley Scott's Prometheus. 1 star for Diary of a Wimpy Kid, The Long Haul. It's a very atypical family road trip movie that really grated on my nerves with its excessive amount of potty humor and telegraphed gags. And 2 stars for King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword, a sword and sorcery film by Guy Ritchie, which could have used a little bit more of Guy Ritchie's influence and a lot less slow-mo action sequences. Remember, you can read more of my reviews at moviespoon.com and movieswithmark.com. And if you like the show, well, feel free to support us on Patreon so that we can keep it going. My name is Mark McPherson, and thank you for watching.